Hey guys, Techie Champion here, and in today's video, I'm going to show you how to install the CSR100v Cisco Cloud Services router in VMware. So why would you want to do this? Basically, this is going to allow you to make large topologies for yourself. If you're studying service provider technology or you want to make large routing topologies, this is going to allow you to do that all on one physical piece of equipment. So let's get started. What we have here is the stack, I guess you could say, of what we're going to be doing. So in my lab, I have a Dell PowerEdge R610 server set up. And then on top of that, I have VMware installed, VMware ESXi. So you install ESXi on your server, and then you go to the Cisco website and get yourself a copy of the CSR100v router, which I showed you how to do in one of my previous videos, CCNA/CCNP must-have tools. If you haven't watched that video yet, I recommend that you go ahead and go watch that. Get yourself a copy of the CSR100v router, and then come back to this one. For those of you that already have a copy of it, let's go ahead and get started. So what we're going to do, I've logged into my VMware host here. It's sitting at this web address. So if you don't know how to access your server once you have it installed, you just go ahead and type in the IP address that you gave it and browse to it from your web browser, log in, and you'll be presented with this page. So what I'm going to do, actually the first thing we need to do is upload the image to our server. So I have a data store right here. I'm going to go to data store browser, upload. My CSR100v image happens to be sitting on my computer right here. So browse to where you have your image saved, highlight it, select it, and open it. That's going to push it up to your VMware host. So we'll go ahead and let that upload. And there it is. What I like to do is create a new directory. I'm going to call it ISO. Then I'm going to right click and move it. I like to keep all my ISO images stored in their own folder, so they're easier to find, and it keeps it more manageable, I suppose. So now that we have the ISO image uploaded here, I'm going to go to virtual machines, create and register a VM. What this does is this allows you to actually create a virtual machine, so we can go ahead and install this image into the virtual machine. So I'm going to highlight and create new virtual machine, click next. We're going to name it. I'm going to name it CSR100v base. So what I do is I create a base image in VMware, and then from there you can just copy this base image and then clone it, I guess, to make as many as you want. So you create a base image, you set it up, and then you clone it over. I'm just going to leave this to its default. Select the OS, which is going to be Linux. And then I'm going to select other Linux, 64-bit. This kind of tells VMware what operating system's running. Other Linux will work. So go ahead and select other Linux, 64-bit, click next. Select your data store of where you want this virtual machine to be installed. I actually have 2 data stores on my server. You may only have 1, so one will only show up. So it won't be too hard for you to decide where you want to save it at. But I'm going to go ahead and save it on data store 1. I'm going to click next. And it's going to ask me to customize the settings here. So what I do, I give it one CPU. If you look on the data sheet for this router, it recommends that you give it 4 virtual CPUs. Um, I, I run it with one and it seems to work just fine with just one. If you run into issues, go ahead and throw another CPU at it. But one seems to work, at least on my server. The recommended memory to give it is 4 gigs. Oh, and this is a weird bug actually that happens in VMware from time to time. Actually, you know what? This is not the bug. I'll show you guys the bug later. We're going to give it 4 gigs of RAM. That's what the datasheet recommends. So 1 virtual CPU, 4 gigs of RAM. What is this? Hold on. Let me back out. See, sometimes when you're doing this stuff, VMware will act buggy like this. Don't worry about this. If this happens, just cancel it, reload your page. I'm not sure what that bug is about. I guess that is the bug. That's a bug that I haven't really seen too often. But anyway, I guess we're going to have to start over. Let's create a register, VM, next, Linux. Other Linux 64. Oh, forgot to give it a name. CSR100v base. Choose your data store. Okay, back to the settings. 1 virtual CPU. We're going to give it 4 gigs in RAM. You can leave the hard disk to 8 gigabytes. That's what it recommends on the data sheet. So leave all that the same. You can leave all this to default for now. So make sure yours looks like mine. Click next. And this is the final specs here. So you can look at it, make sure it all looks right, and then click finish. And it's going to go ahead and create our virtual machine for us. So we're going to go ahead and click on it. The bug that I mentioned earlier is going to happen when I open this. When you open it, it's going to look like this. I don't know why it does this. What I do is I just cancel it, reload the page, and then click edit. I'm running VMware 6.5. I know they have 6.7 out, which is probably what you're going to get if you download it from their website. Maybe that bug has been fixed by now. I'm not sure. Anyway, so what we're going to want to do is go to the CD DVD drive. We're going to go to data store ISO file and select our ISO file here. We're going to insert it into the virtual machine. Click save. After you have that in there, go ahead and power on the virtual machine. And it should boot that image. So what we're going to do is click on console, open browser console. And then we're going to go ahead and let this do its thing. This is probably going to take some time. So what you want to do is just let this run. Don't hit anything. Let it run. I've ran into issues where it's frozen up. If it freezes up, if it's been a reasonable amount of time and it freezes up on you, just go ahead and power the virtual machine down and then turn it back on. Let it install this image. So I'm going to go ahead and let this install, and then I will follow back up with you guys when it's complete. So stand by. All right, guys, so we went ahead and installed the router here. Mine took about 10 minutes to complete. Once it successfully completes, you'll get prompted with, do you want to go through the initial configuration dialog, and you would click or type in no or N for no, hit enter, it'll initialize the router, and then you should have yourself a nice router prompt here. Keep in mind, if you see any errors in the console prompt here, just ignore them. Another thing to keep in mind too is you should not have touched anything while this was installing. Literally, you just power the machine on, step away, go get yourself a cup of coffee. It'll go through the initial configuration of everything. It'll install it. It'll reboot and give you a router prompt. If something goes wrong or freezes up on you, the best thing to do is just shut it down, shut the machine down, and just power it back on again. Let it go through its installation again. But hopefully you guys were successful in installing the router. And you should be here. So just like on any old router, I'm going to type enable conf t, make sure everything's working. Right after you install it, just do a save. You can use WR or copy run start, whatever command you're familiar with. Save the router and then shut it down. What you're going to do is right click, power off. It's going to prompt you. It's going to say, hey, you may lose data. Just ignore that. I'm going to reload my screen to bypass the bug. And what we're going to want to do is click edit and go back into the edit menu here. I'm going to click on the CD drive and remove my ISO file from it. And then I'm going to go right here to add another device. And we're going to want to add a serial port to the router. Where it says new serial port, you're going to change that to use network. So basically with VMware, it has a virtual serial port on it that you can use to console into your routers over a telnet session. I'm going to show you guys how that works here in a minute, but for now, this is how you set it up. So under direction, you're going to want to make sure you have it set to server, and you're going to give it a port URI, which our port URI is going to be the protocol, which is telnet :// the IP address of your VMware host. So whatever IP address you set up and you're connecting to this on, which mine happens to be this address, you put that in here, :a port. I typically use 5000, 5001, whatever, for my connections here. So what this says is use telnet on this IP address on this port to access the serial port of this router. I'm going to save that. You should see it show up here. So in order to install hardware into the router, it needs to be shut down just like a physical router. So we went ahead and removed the ISO file. We've installed the serial port. Go ahead and turn it back on. There's one more thing that we need to do. So we're going to let this load up. And then we're going to be able to access it through PuTTY or Super PuTTY in my case. I recommend using Super PuTTY because it allows you to create tabs in here. So you can set up all of your routers and give them a different port. Keep that in mind. That's very important. They're all going to use the same IP because you're pointing it to your VMware host server. You just set a different port for each router. I typically use 5001 and so on and so forth. R1 would be 5001. R2 would be 5002. You get it. If you don't know where to get Super PuTTY, I encourage you to go ahead and watch my Cisco CCNA CCNP must-have tools video. That's going to show you how to get all this stuff, everything that you're seeing. Just waiting for my router to finish booting. It should boot up a little bit quicker than the initial configuration because you know, now it's installed in the virtual machine. Should take only a couple minutes. Actually, while we're waiting for this, what we have to do in VMware is allow this serial connection through VMware's built-in firewall. So while we're waiting for our routers to boot up here, I'm going to show you how to do that. Go ahead and head over to the networking tab. Click Firewall Rules. Look for VM serial port connected over network. Right click, select Enable. By default, that's blocked in the VMware firewall, so we want to go ahead and allow that traffic. And that's all you have to do. Let's go back to our virtual machine. And let's see if it's booted. There we go. Booted up. So get yourself to global configuration mode, and we're going to give it a new command that you may not be familiar with. It's called platform console serial. By default, this router is set up to use this VMware console here, but they're not very user-friendly, in my opinion. So that's kind of the reason we're doing all of this right now. So platform console serial, hit enter. That tells the router to use the serial port that we installed for its console instead of this VMware console. And then just save your configuration. Now, open up Super PuTTY. Type in the IP address of your server and the port. Make sure under protocol telnet is selected. And mine did not work. So let's troubleshoot this, guys. Let's make sure I got it set up. 5,000. It should have opened right away, which for some reason it's not. Something still isn't right. Exit out of there for a moment. We may need to enable the other one here. Let's just try it real quick. I'm going to enable that. the VMware serial port connected to VSPC. Get back to Super Putty here. Let's try that one more time. Telnet. And it still is not working. Wonder what else. It may need a reboot. Alright guys, so that was definitely it. The problem was you just had to reboot your router for that to take effect, and I had forgotten about that. Now, as you can see, I got a nice console here. So once you have all that finished, so we got the router installed. We've got our serial connection set up over the network so we can hit our router from a better terminal emulation program like Putty or Super Putty. We need to license this router. Now, if you watched my previous video, the Cisco CCNA must have tools video, I showed you a specific router image to grab for this project. And the reason I did that is because Cisco actually changed their licensing model for these guys. So basically right now this router's max throughput is only, I think, like 64 kilobits per second or something like that. If we license it, it'll open up a whole gig. So I'm sorry, I think it's 10 megabits per second. It's not a whole gig, but I believe it's 10 megabits per second will be the max throughput. I forgot. But anyway, 64K it's insufficient. We can't work with that. So on the older router image here, the licensing model is a little bit different. So all we have to do is type in this command. Can't type. License boot level premium. This will activate, I believe, a 60-day license for the premium level. Not only does this unlock the throughput of the router, it unlocks all of the other features in the router so you can do everything. And we're going to type yes to accept. Save your configuration. And reboot it. Oops. Not reboot, but reload. You should be able to hit Control-Shift-6 to get out of stuff like this, but it doesn't always work. Reload. So once we reload the router, it's going to load with the premium level license. And then we'll be able to have decently fast links and all of the router services available to us for labs. Alright guys, so we went ahead and we licensed our router, we rebooted it, and then we shut it back down. And we're going to go ahead and clone it now so we can make more routers. So the thing is, in vSphere 6.5 and so on and so forth, some of the stuff is kind of buggy in the newer interface here. But there is another option, and that is the vSphere client. So what I want you guys to do is head over to this website right here, which I'm going to leave in the description. Download a copy of the VMware vSphere Client 6.0. So go ahead and download that, install it. Once you do, you should have screen like this, and you're going to do kind of the same thing. You're going to point it to your server IP and log in. You can ignore the certificate. Then log into your host with the vSphere client. This was the original way to connect to your ESXi host. And some stuff just works better in this. So what we're going to do is make sure your host is highlighted here, which you probably only have one. We're going to go to summary. We're going to select our data store. We're going to right click on it and browse the data store. Then what I want to do is create a new folder by clicking the folder plus icon here. Actually, before you do that, make sure that you have the slash highlighted, which stands for the root, so that you're at the root of the folder directory. I'm going to call this CSR100v. Oh, I already created mine. It's a nice empty folder. What I want you to do next is select CSR100v base. Now, this is the machine that we created in VMware. These are all the files that are associated with that machine. So all we have to do, hold shift, down arrow to select all the files. I'm going to right click. I'm going to copy. And all we need to do is just paste those files into our new folder here. It's probably going to take a couple minutes. Let it go ahead and do its thing. So what I'm doing now is taking all those files and it's rewriting them to this new folder in the data store. So we'll just go ahead and let that write. Perfect. So now, if you look, we have these files and these files are the same. One thing I forgot to mention is you actually don't need these log files, so you can just typically delete them. What we're going to want to look for is the .vmdk file for the virtual machine disk. Highlight the virtual machine disk, right click, and select, it's the VMX, The VMX file is the one we need. So look for the .vmx file, right click it, add to inventory, and then give it a new name. I named my folder CSR1, so I'm going to name the machine CSR1. Click next, next again. you can just ignore this little error at the bottom, click finish. And if you look over here, there's our machine. I'm going to head back to the new view here. And there's our machine. Keep in mind, whatever you do in here will happen in here, and vice versa. Whatever you do in here will happen in the vSphere client. It's just two different ways to access the same host. It seems like there may be some more features available in here, but it's not compatible with the newer versions of ESXi. So if you look, when we created this machine, we said that it's a ESXi 6.5 machine, which you actually cannot edit any of the hardware configurations in vSphere, unfortunately, if it's a 6.5, because they're kind of getting away from this and wanting you to use this client. But like I said, this client doesn't always work as well as it should. So for some things like cloning your machines, it's better just to use the vSphere client. But I digress. So anyway, I'm going to click on our machine here that we created, and I'm going to refresh my page to bypass that stupid bug, because we want to go ahead and edit one thing. So in our serial port configuration, we want to just change the port on this router to a different port. I'm going to go ahead and make it 5002. Typically though, when I'm labbing, I would make this 5001. So on and so forth. So CSR1 port 5001, CSR2 port 5002. Because once we're done with that base image, we probably won't ever need to turn it on. But just keep in mind that we do need to have a separate port for each router to be able to connect to it separately. So when you go to power it on, it's gonna ask you this question. You can just tell it that you copied it, answer the question, and then go ahead and boot it. Open up your PuTTY session, change the port to 5002, and now we're connected into this router. And just to prove that it works, I'm going to power on the base router that we created, and it's on port 5001. And I'm going to connect to it. And there it is. You can actually click on these tabs too in Super PuTTY. You can right click on it, rename the tab right here. And that's pretty much it, guys. That's how you install a cloud services router in VMware. Stay tuned for my next video. I'm going to show you guys how to network these guys together. Thank you for watching. My name is Techie Champion. Please like, subscribe, and comment below.